Okay. All right. Okay. All right. So my name is Misha Storm. I'm the library director at Dickinson Memorial Library. I want to thank everyone for joining us at tonight's 350th event. Welcome to the Graveyard. I want to thank the Community Bible Church and Bob Emberley for once again welcoming us to this space. In a year filled with events, our community's churches have become essential event spaces far beyond their usual services. I also want to thank the Northfield Historical Society for co-hosting this event with us tonight. It has been a wonderful year of learning about our town's history, and we are lucky to hear yet another perspective from tonight's presenter, Brenda Sullivan, of the Massachusetts-based Gravestone Girls. Brenda has been hanging out in cemeteries since she was a kid and creating rubbings and other gravestone artwork as a young adult. She has been the leader of the Gravestone Girls for 2 decades, along with Melissa Anderson and Maggie Phillips, and is a member of the Association for Gravestone Studies. The Gravestone Girls keep our dead alive through lectures, tours, classes, and art. They strive to preserve a rich folk art tradition unique to our nation. So tonight, let's welcome Brenda as she takes us on a tour of our cemeteries here in Northfield through the lens of cemetery history, symbolism, and art. So welcome, Brenda.
Wow, that was a fabulous introduction. Can you all hear me, or do you want the mic? Yeah? Okay, I'll try. We're going to move this, because I guess you do have to eat it to make it work, right? How's that? Oh my God, it's almost as tall as I am. Can you all see okay? No, I'm not touching anything. With the way my electronics have been going tonight, I should have nothing to do with that. Don't worry, I'm loud enough. You'll all be able to hear me okay. Can you see okay? Excellent, excellent. Couple of pieces of housekeeping before we get going. If you could all silence your cell phones, that would be magnificent. It is very distracting when people take calls in the middle of a program. So the penalty for that is I get your phone. And I'm looking for a new phone, so whoever's got the best one. Also, if you could hold your questions until the end, you'll realize really quickly that I can talk about this all day. And if you interrupt me in the middle of everything with a really great question, you're going to get me off track, and wherever you all need to be on Sunday, you're going to be late. So, and actually, I think I will ask for some kind of assistance to bring this down because, yeah, it's taller than I am. And I think all the we're being recorded tonight because you guys are going to make me famous. Oh, that's better. So all the camera is going to see is the mic right here in front of my face. So, yeah, that's fine. I mean, I'm loud enough, so we'll work between the two. So I want to make sure y'all can hear me. All right, let's go. Actually, I'm going to do this because that way I can see what's coming up. Welcome to the Graveyard. This is your tour of cemetery art and history and symbolism with the Gravestone Girls. There is indeed an S on the end of that, as Misha alluded to. There is more than one Gravestone Girl. I know people are often surprised to see just one of me up here, but trust me, by the end of the evening, you will be glad there's only one of me up here. So there were many Gravestone Girls. My 90-year-old father happens to be a magnificent Gravestone Girl. This is a shot of 3 of the original Gravestone Girls in their natural habitat. So that's me. Mom Brenda, we may have mentioned that. That's Melissa. She keeps us looking good on the internet. She's our web mistress. And that unconventional conventionalist is Maggie, my best friend since a really long time ago. I don't put numbers on that anymore because y'all don't need to know I'm 825 years old. So separately and together, the 3 of us have been traversing graveyards and cemeteries for a really long time. Melissa grew up out this way in Munson. Mag and I grew up in central Massachusetts. Our mission is indeed to keep our dead alive by preserving cemetery art and history. Shameless self-promotion. gravestonegirls.com. On the back table, you'll find a postcard like this. Take it with you on your way out the door. This is how you find us again. You can shop online at the website. We've got a lot of great resources on the website. Follow us on social media. All our contact information here for email and everything. You wake up tomorrow, you wake up 3 a.m. with a burning question about tonight, send me an email. And if you're not already following us on social media, I want my numbers up tomorrow. So let's take care of that. So Gravestone Girls do a bunch of different things, and this is one of them. We do public presentations. We want to talk to you about what's on your main streets and your back roads and why these graveyards and cemeteries look like they do. We lead cemetery tours, so we do walking tours where it would be a program like this, but actually out in the field, tromping around in the cemeteries. We teach proper gravestone rubbing and gravestone cleaning techniques, and I'm not going to get into that tonight. Those are separate programs, but know that there's a lot of misconception about gravestone rubbing and gravestone cleaning. It's bad, it's wrong, it's dangerous. Some people even think it's illegal, and we're kind of the myth busters of that genre. There is nothing wrong with doing either of those as long as you have the proper materials, permission, and you know the proper techniques. See, there's a beautiful one right there. So that being said, I grew up rubbing gravestones in my family's Central Massachusetts cemetery. So years go by, I've got all these pieces of paper. I've got all these two-dimensional gravestone rubbings, and I really wanted something more than just those pieces of paper. And so that leads, there's just a few examples here, but the other thing that Gravestone Girls do is we create gravestone replicas. I have an art history and restoration education, so I developed a process along with Maggie's help to recreate stones as they sit out on the cemetery landscape. So we probably have about 200 or so pieces, images in the collection currently that can be seen on the website. I take it to a lot of markets. I sell at a lot of retail partners across the country. They are elements of the larger stones that still live out on the cemetery landscape. They are purely decorative. We make magnets and wall plaques, things to hang on the wall, mirrors, coasters. We put some fun back into the cemetery. And also something that's equally important when we send these pieces home with our customers, they have a history tag on the back. And the history tag tells you the name of the person, the name and location of the graveyard, plus information about the symbol. Because we feel the history is just as important as the art, and certainly in this part of the country we're one of the oldest, and we've got so many beautiful existing colonial New England tombstones that we'd like to share with everybody. So that's enough about how fabulous the Gravestone Girls are. There will be more of that later, not to worry. So before we get started on tonight's tour, we have to answer two basic questions about the origin and the evolution of the cemetery. And those two questions are, why do we bury the dead, and where do gravestones come from? The archaeological record, dating 50,000 or more years ago, continuously shows us that many different cultures and civilizations believe that there was something more than this world. When you leave here, that's not the end. You go somewhere else. And we know that because archaeological and anthropological excavations continuously bring up graves with grave goods in it. This is a very simple one, but we've got some pots here that might have oils, food, beads, something that would be needed for the deceased in the next world. And because we are mortal, we only have a certain amount of time, right? So when someone dies, we dig a grave, we put the body in the grave, and early on, that grave was covered with not one stone, but multiple stones. So that pile of stones on top of the grave served a couple of really good purposes. Shows you where you put somebody. If you want to go back and visit, you want to go back and memorialize. It shows where you put somebody so that when it's time to bury someone else, you don't disturb the folks that are already buried. And it served a very practical purpose of keeping wild animals out of that freshly turned earth. So that's the origin of the term gravestone. That being said, and what we know about the archaeological record, aren't those big pointy things really just big old gravestones? Right? They contain wonderful things that Pharaoh needs for the next world. So it can be very small and simple, it can be very grand, but very consistently over and over, the message has been put out over many millennia that there's a strong belief system that says there's something more after this. I can talk about 50,000 years worth of history, no problem. We don't have that kind of time, so I'm going to bring us right up to the good stuff. We're going to take an evolutionary tour from the early 1600s, from first settlement up through the modern time. And these are three very commonly seen, very typical landscapes for those times. This is a colonial burial ground, so from first settlement through the 1700s, and they are burial grounds here. They're not cemeteries yet, and we'll talk about that. Then there's the the rural garden movement of the 19th century, where the landscape really changes. And then we'll also take a peek inside the modern cemeteries of the 20th and the 21st centuries. In preparation for tonight's program, I went to all your cemeteries in town. And I'll remind you again when we get to the modern section. And I took pictures, and it means I took pictures in your modern cemeteries as well. I've tried to conceal identities the best I can, but it's possible when we get to the modern cemetery, you might find somebody up on the screen that you know. Don't freak out. It's happened before, which is why I'm giving you the warning. I'm not trying to use any of the modern stuff to say this is a better example or this is not a good example, or I'm not trying to pick on anybody. I'm using what I find on the 20th and 21st century landscapes to illustrate what we as modern people think about ourselves, think about memorialization, and perhaps who we were and what we did while we were here. I'm doing that the same way with the modern stuff as I do with what I see and record in both the colonial and the rural garden cemeteries. So just keep that in mind. I'll remind you again when we get to that section. Northfield cemeteries. So you were colonized in 1673. Happy 350th birthday. Looking good. You still got 500 some odd years to catch up to me. You were incorporated in 1728, and you got 9 documented cemeteries in town, ranging from 1685 right up through the present day. I found them all. I took pictures of them all. So when you're looking at my slides, each one will have a title on it that'll tell you what we're looking at, and then where it is. So if it's in town, here in Northfield, it's going to say the name of the cemetery or burial ground where I found it. So what we're looking at here is field stones as gravestones, and I found examples of them in both Center and Collar cemeteries here in town. So early on, remember I talked about the idea of just putting rocks on the grave. So early on, first settlement, right up into the last quarter of the 1600s, if there are any kind of memorials out there, they are just those rough rocks. Maybe they've got something on them, like here we've got, looks like RF inscribed in it. It's going to be very simple. It's not about having anything ornamental or anything fancy. It is a marker, and if it's your family member, you know where you put them, so you don't need the sort of what we later come to put pomp and circumstance on. It's just, the heavy ornamentation is just not part of the vernacular of the early settlers. They got bigger things to think about. So I've got one with some inscription here. I've got a couple here from, I believe this is Center. This might actually be, this is Collar. And then this great inscription Just that it runs all the way across. When we ran out of room, we just wrapped it around to the other side. And you might notice that this would seem to have a sort of a late date on it, actually of 1736. And we're going to walk through that a little bit and learn some more. This is a very typical colonial landscape. When you look at these spaces, so this is in general, last quarter of the 1600s and into the early 1700s. We are colonizing areas, we're getting settled, we're staying, and then we're starting to build our towns. And in order to get a charter to establish a town in Massachusetts at the time, you had to do a bunch of things, including putting in a burial ground. You had to have a meeting house, you had to have a bunch of things, but one of the requirements was actually a burial ground. So that's why Center dates back to 1685, and then we go forward from there. They're your first burial ground. So know that when you look at this space, it has absolutely changed over time. And I know that sounds very strange to our modern ears, but it's a fact. So these spaces are typically in the center of town or the original center of town. They are kind of haphazard when they're first put in. There's not a lot of organization. But what happens over time, town grows. We put in roads where there were no roads before. We widen roads that might have existed previously. We build buildings. All of that encroaches on this space, as well as, over time, landscaping, keeping up the appearance of the burial ground is going to impact this space. Certainly just general aesthetics at different time periods. People will come into these spaces and go, we got to clean this up. This place is messy. And that often includes reorganizing the stones. So one of the visual cues that you would get is this idea. We've got some pretty nice, neat lines there, right? And you also have a whole bunch of sprinkling of 19th century stuff in there as well. So you're always going to have periods that overlap each other, or most often, particularly when you have one space that continues to grow as we pass from one cemetery type or one type of burial place into another. Talking about Massachusetts, we have two major kinds of materials for making gravestones. So this is slate over here on the left. Actually, yeah, that's your left, got it. Don't follow me anywhere. It will not do you any good. And also sandstone. Red and brown sandstones that come out of the Connecticut River Valley. So if you take Massachusetts and you kind of divide it around the Brookfields, from the Brookfields east to the sea, slate is your dominant material. From about the Brookfields all the way out to the edge of the state and down into Connecticut, where the Connecticut River Valley runs, this sandstone is typically your locally available material. You guys also out here, because of your mountainous proximity, you've got quartzites and other feldspar types of material. But as a general broad umbrella, these are your two main materials for making gravestones. They're going to use something that's locally available. Remember, you've got to get in the wagon, go out to wherever the material location is, get it out of the ground, put it in the wagon, bring the wagon back. Now you can start working it, whatever that material might be, and really whatever you're using it for. We use slate for roofing and other types of building materials. So you're not going to go far because this is a very labor-intensive process. And because of the Connecticut River and because of all the slate pits around the New England area, these are two very easily accessible materials for many things, including tombstone making. Gravestones originally came in pairs. They could come in pairs. You had a headstone and a footstone. So I got an example here. These are kind of late, but they are a good illustrator. What I actually found is you don't have a lot of existing footstones here. And that's completely normal, and we'll get to that. So the headstone marks the head of the grave, here, and the footstone marks the end of the grave, there. So if you bury father and he's 6 feet tall, there's a 6-foot spread between his headstone and his footstone. And you bury mother next to him and she's 5 feet tall, then there's a 5-foot spread between her headstone and footstone. So if we take that example and we apply it up here, we're going to go, oh, those people are all the same size. And when you see a whole row of them and they look like that, you go, wow, everybody in town must have been all the same size. What this really is a visual cue that this space has changed. So I mentioned groundskeeping. You want to be the guy that has to mow around or use your scythe or your cows to clean up the grass over time. No, you want to be efficient about it. And also I mentioned the idea about aesthetics. So if you have big stones and little stones and they're all over the place because you bury them according to their height with the starting and stopping stones, it's going to be very busy on the landscape. And during certain times, people would come around and go, again, this place is messy. We got to clean it up. So if we're lucky, they get pushed out and they sort of make their own row. If we're lucky, they get chucked up behind the parent headstone. And what I found in just a couple of cases around town is, here he is, here's the little footstone next to the parent stone. So at least it's still on the landscape. But it's completely normal for these things to go elsewhere. They end up over the wall, in the woods, off the property. They end up in walkways and patios. I've seen them in window sills in buildings. I've seen them in kitchens. I've seen them all over the place. So we're just good Yankees, right? The idea of historic preservation, the way we think of it today, is a very 20th century kind of idea. And the historians typically mark the demolition of Penn Station with that idea in the 1960s with that idea. Oh wait, we should not have knocked down that beautiful historic structure. Maybe we should have saved that. So the demolition of Penn Station in the 60s really marks that turning point where preservation becomes a thing. And don't think that this moving and shaking does not still happen, because we know that it does. So I got headstones and I got footstones. The little footstones are going to have something in common with the big ones. So if this is my tombstone, this big one, and it says my name on it, Brenda P. Sullivan, well then the little guy in hopefully close proximity will have my initials or my name inscribed, something that ties the big one to the little one. If this one doesn't match, the little one doesn't match the big one, it's just another clue for you that the space has been reorganized. And certainly a footstone parallel to a headstone is going to be a really good indication that they've been moved around. Look at all my friends up there. I get asked a lot, skulls on gravestones, what's wrong with those people? What were they thinking? Well, they were thinking that life was short and hard and mortality was a thing. So very religious at the time, they're very superstitious, they're spending a lot of time in Sunday services. If you've got somebody at home that can read, after dinner you got somebody reading the Bible to you in the evening, they're following the Bible to the letter. They're very literal in the interpretation. And it translates from the land of the living into the land of the dead. And one of the earliest symbols that starts showing up on our colonial tombstones is this winged skull. It's called a death's head. It starts showing up last quarter of the 1600s and then carries on into the 1700s. And this is the idea of the immortal soul. So we use the skull to show the idea of being mortal. At the time, to carve something into stone that looked human or angelic would have been considered a graven image, and it would have been blasphemous. So this is the very literal interpretation of being human and representing the idea of the immortal soul. Because what you did here is what that immortal soul was judged on to get to the next world, to get its reward. You spent all your time just trying to survive during this period. So how you held up under those trials and tribulations is how you were determined to get your reward on the other side. So I said that winged skull, that death's head starts being used the last quarter of the 1600s, runs into the 1700s. In around the 1720s or 30s, there's sort of this backlash, this religious, this backlash to the really strict dictates of religion, that very literal interpretation, the idea that the slightest transgression is going to be the difference between heading up or heading down. They still believe in the care and feeding of the immortal soul. They still have to work hard and get through all the things that life throws at you here while you're mortal to dictate the end result for that immortal soul. But now we backed off on that stringent interpretation. And that winged skull, those bones are allowed to reclaim their skin, and now they can take on a human or an angelic look without running the risk of being a graven image and being sacrilegious. These are all from Center Cemetery. They are all kinds of different variants. And I said that, this winged skull comes into the 1700s, and then that changes the 1720s, 1730s. You can't, that is true, but you can't say, well, the winged skull stopped being used in 1723. That's not how it works. One symbol will continue on. They will overlap with each other. One gains dominance as the other fades away. I have seen tombstones with winged skulls on them dating to the end of the 1700s and just flipping over into 1800 or 1801. Remember, you don't always get a gravestone the moment you die. You might not get one for a year, 5 years, 10 years, maybe never. Maybe somebody replaces your gravestone later. It is entirely possible that stones are created well after somebody's death and are very often backdated. So that being said, you may wonder why I didn't show you any winged skulls from Northfield. I keep hearing through different people that there are no winged skulls out in western Massachusetts. Carvers worked in pockets and influenced each other. So that makes perfect sense. I mean, I've got a town here in 1673, you should have winged skulls. But that you don't has probably a direct function to your carvers, how they were working, what they were making, and what the people were asking for on their imagery. So this kind of looks like a winged skull, right? So this is a photo of it from quite some time ago that someone gave me. This is what this stone looks like now. It's dated 1726, and as far as I'm concerned, this one and even that guy could go either way. You might have some winged skulls, you might not, but you definitely have that soul message on your tombstones out here just like everybody else. Souls don't have to have wings either to show the idea of being human. You've got some really fabulous carvers that were working out here in the 1700s and did some really memorable images like these guys, all done in the Janes family. So like I said, carvers worked in pockets and really influenced each other's, and you had carvers doing it as a primary vocation and also people doing gravestone cutting to fill a need that someone might ask them for. They just want to take up the vocation, take it up as a second vocation. Again, this is an old photograph of this. This is a reverend stone that is in Center Cemetery. This is the last time I saw it. Sandstone, that is a sandstone or marble. These guys are all slate. This is dirty enough that I can't tell you whether it's a sandstone or marble right off the bat, but this beauty right here is from Center and also made of marble. So marble and sandstone are materials that don't wear well over time, so it's why when I find older pictures, of something that I find out on the landscape, I like to put them side by side. You can really see how much they've changed over time. Other symbols, not just the winged souls, not just the winged skulls. Look at this guy, how beautiful, right? See your stars here? So stars were guiding lights. They're also pretty easy to carve too. They make good fillers in spaces. But stars are symbols of the first thing seen in the night sky and the last thing to go in before the sun rises in the morning. Hourglasses. Everyone's born with an hourglass. You had a certain amount of sand. You didn't know how much sand you had. And that glass was running the minute you started breathing. And you didn't know how much sand you had. And that last grain of sand could drop at any moment. And you needed to be prepared for that at every turn. He's got a lot of wear on him, but look at those grapes. Grapes are biblically a symbol of your maker. Not your wine maker, but your human maker. But also the idea of bounty, the whole idea about, we're in church, the idea about wine and prosperity. I love coming out to Western Mass because I see this. You guys know what that is? It's a coffin. It's laying on its side, but it's called a toe pincher coffin. So the head of the coffin is up here, and then it's wide for the wide part of the body, and then it comes down to this point, and it's how it got its name, toe pincher. That and this kind of style, and like I said, this kind of style, I see a lot of when I come out the Western Mass way. See that Latin phrase up there over her beautiful capped head? Memento mori. So we have pictures on the stones. We have English on the stones. We have Latin on the stones. Memento mori. Think about death. Remember your mortality. There's a version of this, memento mortis, that says remember to die. Choice. We got to make sure we get everybody, right? We get the really educated that recognize the language of the law. We get the folks that can read and write the English language, written language, and we also use the picture language to get those people that can read and write but don't stop to read those stones all the time, as well as the folks who cannot read and write. It needs to be this very quick visual and really harsh and we think spooky, quick reminder to check your behavior and make sure that you're doing all the right stuff to give your immortal soul the path to the next world. Excuse me. This is a fabulous stone in Hartford, Connecticut. It's got this fancy Latin phrase across the top. That's great. Even in the 21st century, I don't need to know how to read Latin to understand the visual message on that stone. There's the tree. You're the tree. Human lives are like trees. It has a definite beginning, it has a definite end, and that tree, that life, is fragile and can be interrupted at any time without warning. So, you're the tree, you got up one day, you thought you were going to have a normal day, and here comes your maker out of the clouds with his hatchet, and he felled your tree. Hope you were ready. You didn't see it coming. It happened, and hopefully you've used the time that you had to pave the way for that immortal soul, because you didn't know it was coming. Today was the day. But don't worry, death is not a permanent condition. Lightly inscribed across the top of this beautiful stone out in Oxford reads, "The grave is God's hiding place." Really kind of like God's waiting room. We leave this earth, we go into the grave, we are hanging around and we're waiting for something. And this is what we're waiting for. We're waiting for Judgment Day. We're waiting for the sound of Gabriel's trumpet, which reminds me, I forgot to tell you about those headstones and footstones and their east-west axis orientation. So even in this time period, late 1600s and into the 1700s, even the way you were buried was important. So the body is behind the headstone. So the writing would be facing west. That's that west part of the east-west axis. It's just all about saying the fancy way of saying the way that we're oriented. The body is behind the headstone. And the idea is on Judgment Day, in hopes of resurrection, Gabriel's going to come from the east blowing his trumpet, and everybody in the ground is going to sit up facing east to meet their maker. It's a really important call. You don't want to miss this. Because even if you're buried the wrong way in the ground, and you hear the call, and you get up and you're like, hey, where is everybody? Or worse, you don't hear the call because you aren't oriented the same way. That being said, when you walk into these old graveyards, make note of where the sun is. Make note where east and west is. And look at the stones. Are the faces of those stones, with its art and its writing, are the faces of those stones being shone on by the sun from the west? Or are they facing in another direction? If they're facing in another direction, chances are good that that's another visual cue that the landscape has changed over time. So when Gabriel comes on that glorious day and blows his horn, we're looking for resurrection. It's the call to resurrection, the idea of being redeemed of your sins and ascending. That soul going off to the next world to get its reward. Look at my handsome devil right there. He is mortality, he is morality, but he's also death. And it says, all must submit to the King of Terrors. Death was known as the king of all terrors, and all must submit. And some 20th century song guys say, right, nobody gets out of here alive. Yeah, they knew that 300-400 years ago. It's not new news. But don't worry, keep reading. It goes on to say, through Christ, we conquer, rise, and reign forever. The promise of resurrection and the promise of the reward in the next world. Starting to look different, right? As we come to the end of the 1700s, there's a lot of change going on. We have a revolution. We tell the folks in England it's been great, but we got to go. So we're going to break off and we're going to become a new nation. And the founding fathers are working on this ideology of what should we model ourselves after? What do we stand for? What do we believe in? Well, they look at the classical civilizations of the Greeks and the Romans, who were the founders of the concepts of democracy and the republic, the idea of the people governing themselves. And while they're doing all that high-minded thinking, there's real-time archaeology going on over in Europe. So Greece is being excavated, Rome and the far reaches of the Roman outposts across the continent of Europe are being explored. Napoleon is in Egypt. This is the time frame where Pompeii comes to light for the first time since the volcano went off in 79 AD. So all of the goods, the tangible goods of the people that existed in those cultures are coming to light. And they influence the land of the living. We change, and because it influences our art, our architecture, our furniture making, our mode of dress, many things in the land of the living, and many things in the land of the dead. And the most prominent thing that comes out of that is the urn. So it's a cinerary urn. It's the idea that cremation has been in place for thousands of years. It is also the vessel that metaphorically carries the body to the next world. So why wouldn't it be a new modern symbol for the new modern folks of the time of this new republic? And it starts showing up on tombstones. It's even sort of in a little arch right there, in a little niche. There's my tree again. It's a very specific tree. It's a weeping willow. So by virtue of its name and by virtue of the way it looks, it's a perfect modern symbol for sorrow, and mourning. And again, trees are like human life, like human beings. Definite beginning, definite end, and that life can be interrupted at any time. Can you see where the tree is split here? That idea of life being interrupted. And when you go out in the field, into the cemeteries, which I know you all already do, and will do more so after I leave here, look, when you find the willows like that, and they're split, look and see if there's a little bit of, just a little bump in the middle where that tree is split. That's the idea of a new life. It gets chiseled in there to show that from this end, something new comes up. It's always quite fun to find. So they start showing up on tombstones regularly by themselves, and also they come together and they become the very dominant symbol for the time. This is as we're firmly rolling into the 1800s. We've got the urn, something dead, the tree, something living, so a definite beginning and a definite end. I wanted to share this with you because it's such a beautiful example. Here's the willow up here, here's the urn in its niche, and then everything below that is sort of metaphor. So this is terra firma up here, and then there's the rest of it. So I've got beautiful neoclassical columns on either side. This is the gate you go through to enter the graveyard. This is the entrance to the tomb, but also the portal can be interpreted as the portal from this world to the next. This looks really different, doesn't it? This is Mount Auburn Cemetery. And it is among the first time in this country, a place where we bury our dead gets called a cemetery. Cemetery comes from a Greek word that means sleeping place or dormitory. It really is part of that whole change that reflects who we as modern people are as we move from being an agrarian culture to being an industrialized nation. Many people are leaving the farms, leaving the country, they're leaving the countryside, going into the cities, and they're working in the factories. And the factories' mechanizations are making life a whole lot easier to get through. You can get your clothes easier, you can get have some money, you can have some free time. So we're changing as a modern society in the 19th century. So if the living are changing, the dead are going to change too. So Mount Auburn was established in 1831 by the Massachusetts Horticultural Society. So it started out as a place to bury the dead based on places like the Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris, as well as, because of the influence from the Horticultural Society, it's taking its cues from the English garden movement of the time, and it was also initially started to be an arboretum as well. So someplace not just to bury the dead, but someplace to propagate plants, trees and plants for improving the landscape and also preserving those trees and plants. So everything about this is different. Walkways, green rolling hills, the materials are different, the shapes and sizes of the monuments are different. This reflects so many things. So we've just talked about the change from agrarian to industrialized. This is also a reflection of the idea of communing with nature. So your writers of the time, the Hawthornes and yep, there we go. Ooh, goodbye. Yes, thank you. Hawthorne's, Thoreau's, all those folks are writing not just about communing with nature, but preserving it. You've got your spiritualists and your transcendentalists of the time that are out there, you know, they're having their seances and they've got their Ouija boards and they're trying to commune with the folks that have gone before because they go somewhere, right? So we should be able to talk to them, and we continue to try to talk to them. This is also open green space. So this becomes a tourist attraction when it is opened, the same way it does, as it functions today. Many people come from all over the world to visit Mount Auburn Cemetery and others like it that were created in the 19th century. And it is because it's not only is it a newfangled cemetery and it looks really different, it's open green space 4 miles outside of downtown, filthy, industrialized 19th century Boston. And here's 2 examples from town. I've got Northfield and Northfield Farms. We're going to expand on the burial area that we have and start to change the landscape, or we're going to open up a whole new cemetery. And we're going to make it look, we're going to follow the same kind of patterns as the rural garden cemetery movement of the 19th century. In these newfangled cemeteries, we have the opportunity to purchase a family plot. So you can buy your own piece of land. This is sort of your home away from home, your vacation home. Right? I know it sounds funny, but it's really kind of true. So you all live together as a family unit, and then one by one, as someone passes on, they'll go to the family lot. And we may decorate our family lots with a type of foundation, something maybe like this, just some simple curbing or coping that says, this is the 4 square, this is my foundation. We may have a very large lot, and here we've got a little front door. You know, you go up the walkway, you go through the stairs, you pass through the door, just like you would in your own home. This is the land in the land of the living, this is the land of the dead. And if you have one family plot, and then another, and there's another one back there, and I got the benefit of the roadway that passes through the cemetery here, I've got a neighborhood. And these are very social spaces because people are coming to visit their beloveds all the time. They're planting flowers, they're tending their lots, they're bringing their picnics, they're bringing their books, they are socializing with the other living that are doing the same for their families in these spaces. And they're also keeping your loved ones gone but not forgotten, right? Keeping your family together even though you aren't all physically present. I thought this was a pretty good example of a family lot. The Dwight and Emma Moody family lot on the grounds of what is now called the D.L. Moody Center. Very common to be buried on your own property right through the 19th century, and it is still indeed actually possible to do it today. Got to plan ahead though. Much softer symbols, no more axes, no more skulls, no more hairy scaries. Everything's much more pleasant to reflect the idea of the modern cemetery and the idea of passing from this world to the next. So much softer symbols. We incorporate our religion as well, or our belief in another world, another power. So doves are peace. Doves are also the Holy Spirit. I've got a lovely little lamb there. I know that kind of looks like a meatloaf, but I promise you it's a lamb. The idea of the Lamb of God, lambs and often doves, but definitely lambs are very often used for children in the 19th century. I got a lovely lamb here, but he kind of looks like a seal, doesn't he? Well, you know, I think all of these are a really great example of marble, and we'll talk about that in just a sec. Again, hard to see, but there's 3 hearts. 2, 3. 3 hearts on the stone. I've got a book up on a pulpit, or up on the idea perhaps of the book of life, or the idea of the Bible, recording the family history, recording the family story. And then down here, I've got a chain, and you can see the chain is broken. The idea that someone dies and that family chain is broken. And I can't read anything here. It kind of looks like there may have been something, but perhaps not. But I have often seen the broken chain like that. In the middle of that chain, in this space here, I often see it written parted below, reunited above. So the idea that even though you're not physically together any longer, there is the promise that you will all come back together. And this might be a good point to talk about marble, just really quickly. You have a lot more marble out here on the older stuff. Close to Vermont. So you've got another, you've got the sandstones, you've got the slates and the schists, and you've got the marble. Marble gets adopted pretty much across the country in these new cemeteries in the 19th century because it is more readily available. We've got waterways, we've got railroads, we can get material from farther away, and we can use it for more everyday things like gravestones and not just for big important buildings or important statuary. It was chosen because of availability. It was chosen because it's symbolically, it's white, it's bright, it looks like heaven and purity. So the problem with it is its chemical composition. Marble and limestone are all those little sea creatures that have died over billions of years and been compressed at the bottom of the ocean floor. They don't wear well in our elements. So they're very granular. There's a lot of calcium carbonate in it, so it's very easily eroded through water and wind, and also it's also very porous. So it will pick up the pollutants in the atmosphere, causes a chemical reaction with the calcium carbonate, and causes it to discolor. It creates a chemical reaction that causes a soluble salt. So that's why you see them, they look black so very often. So the good news is all of these could be cleaned and be much, much more white. I've seen them sometimes so clean that you need sunglasses. They are so bright. However, once they've been eroded, once this stuff is gone, once his ears are gone, you can't get them back. We talked about the trees. Well, of course, there's a language of flowers in the 19th century. So flowers are like human life, definite beginning, a definite end, but the stem of that flower and that bloom is very fragile. And that stem can be interrupted at any time. And I've got some lovely examples, and you'll see we've got the fallen with the head down. The idea that the flower that starts, it buds, the bud blooms, and then the bud fades. When you find them, and I know this is hard to see too, and that's because of the erosion on it, but do you see that? That's just a little bud on a almost detached stem, very often used for small children, young women as well, and the idea of the flower that never blooms, the bud that never comes to fruition, and consequently the life that never gets the opportunity, the rose that never gets to bloom. I wanted to include this too, because I see a lot of this flowers out here as well. You've got at least 3, if not 4 generation of family carvers out here called the Souls, or the Souls, depending on who you talk to, that were very prominent gravestone cutters, and this is one of the 3rd or 4th generation. He had a particular style in doing those lovely flowers in the 19th century. Other nods to nature, I've got ferns, very prolific. I've got oak leaves, so often used for men, the idea of the mighty oak of the family. I have wreaths of flowers. Wreaths are for memorial, they are victory, and they're also the idea of the circle. So no beginning, no end. And then, again, hard to tell because of the erosion, but this is a tree, it's called, it's not really a tree stump monument, but it's supposed to be the idea of 2 logs put together to make the cross, and I think maybe you can see the little branches that had been cut off over there. Originally, this would have had some texture to it, like bark. It would have been very obvious that it was meant to be that nod to nature, being made out of, looked like it's made out of wood, but actually made out of marble. If you're looking for me, this is where we're going. Anyone that knows me doesn't believe that, so it's fine. All my friends are going to be in the same place with me. Pointing fingers, right? I got one there. I've got one here. That is no different than the winged skull that we saw early on in the colonial period. It means that there's something else. This is where we're going. This is what we aspire to. I've got messages here. We part to meet again, and then we meet to part no more. So we die here. We go to the other side, and then the family comes along. We're all put back together, and we're not going to be separated again. Again, because of the marble, it's tough to see, but there's an inscription up here that says, "There is rest in heaven." And up here, over that finger, that pointing finger says, "Gone, but not forgotten." It was far worse to die it was far worse to not be remembered in the 19th century than it was to die. You all knew you were going to go, but to not be remembered would really have been a sad state. I want you to make sure you know this guy. He's pretty easy to make out. That hand is reaching down and picking those flowers. So sort of like the idea of the hatchet in the tree, but a softer symbol, the idea of your maker coming and picking the flower that you are and bringing you to the next world. And this one's really tough, but it's really good. There's some clouds here, so we still have clouds like we had with the hatchet one. There's the hand. You see those fingers reaching down and pulling the chain and breaking the chain there. And of course, we'll meet again. Goodbye in this life, hello in the next life. When you look at these marbles, use your 19th century eyes and think of what they looked like when they were new, when they were all bright and white and not eroded, and how beautiful they must have looked on the landscape. Since you had so many of these, I needed to make sure you knew about them. So these are, I've got an obelisk here, a whole bunch of obelisks here, and then I've got a column. So these are other takes on classicism. The two obelisks are an ancient Egyptian symbol. So I mentioned earlier that Napoleon was in Egypt at the end of the 1700s. He's collecting up a lot of stuff, and he's bringing it back, and he's handing it out all over the place. And he takes, I believe it's 12 obelisks, and he distributes them, including putting one in the center of Paris. And again, it's classicism, it's new, we haven't seen these before, so along with a lot of the other imagery, the obelisk gets adopted onto the landscape. It's wide at the base, it tapers as it moves up, so it looks like motion. It feels like it's rushing skyward. And then certainly over here I've got a column, and you can see that it's got an asymmetrical top on it. It's been broken. And it's the idea that not even architecture stands forever. Everything is susceptible to this world. I need you to know about these because I found these in town. I found in Bolton Center Cemetery. This is called a box tomb. And that's a table stone. And you'll notice I put table in quotes, and we'll talk about that in a second. Let's pretend that that's actually a real table stone. And it's the idea, both the box and the table stone, when I find these in town, they are often for the clergy or prominent members of the community. If I drive around town and I see a name that I've seen in the cemetery, maybe I'll see it on the street sign or your post office or your community center or your library. These are not to say, having these sort of monuments dates back well into Europe, where the crypts, the tombs underneath the church, they are under the altar. They are under the main part of the church. They're under the altar in the church, in the nave. And that's prime real estate. That is where the clergy is buried. That's where wealthy patrons buy their way in. All the rest of you riffraff, outside. So using these two kind of ideas, they are symbolic of the altar in the church. Don't let anybody tell you there's a body in that box. There is no body in that box. The body is still in the ground. That might have a brick center, be solid brick square that then has marble veneer on the outside of it. It might just be 4 panels. And when you find these out on the landscape and they've collapsed over time for whatever reason, you try being outside 24/7 for a couple hundred years, see how you do. They will erode, deteriorate, collapse, and you can often get a good look inside. Is it hollow, or was there a central structure to it? The reason I said quote unquote table for this one, this is clearly, you can see the shoulders on the stones, right? So rounded shoulder, the tympanum where the art is, and then look at all that writing. It is not to say, and I'm certain that on the top of that flat, there's a lot of information as well. It is not to say, look how great I was. There might be a little of that. But the idea behind it is, if you're a member of the clergy, if you're a prominent member of society, a founding father, something like that, you are to set the example. Particularly the clergy. If there's somebody that's supposed to help you navigate this world and get to the next one, help that soul get to the next world, it's the clergy. They're the conduit between this world and the guide. And certainly the founding fathers and the like, they would be the idea of, I am an upstanding citizen, I invest in my community, and they set the tone that others should aspire to follow. So normally on a table stone, this is a square. It doesn't have that tympanum on the top. So part of me says that this is a gravestone that later on came down for whatever reason, and they put these ornamental supports underneath it. But also, it's beveled along the edges. There's a lot of nice ornamentation there. And I certainly see it in stones that are vertical, but that is kind of something that you do when you're going to do a table stone on some supports on a pedestal. Doesn't matter what you call it, it's still a pretty great object on the landscape. This looks really different, doesn't it? So now we're moving out of the 1800s and firmly into the 20th century. So this is, before I get going, this is the part where I remind you in the next slide or two, you might see someone you know. As we come out of the 1800s, again, big changes at the end of the century. We've had a civil war. We've got all sorts of mechanizations and inventions that are just propelling us fast and furious into the future. And there's a couple of big things that change for us as people in society. One, the rise of modern medicine. We come into the last quarter of the 1800s. Medicine is starting to move from being art to being science. And as we come in through the 20th century, again, fast and furious, medicine is moving at such a rate that we understand about bacteria, we understand how disease is spread, we understand that we have to have clean water and keep our food refrigerated so it doesn't poison us, and if we get sick from our poisoned food, now just keep drinking water, it'll pass. Prior to simple inventions like penicillins and antibacterials, and if you got a paper cut, you get a paper cut today. Is this a big deal? No. You put some antibacterial ointment on it, you put a Band-Aid on it, you're going to be fine. You get a cut back then, you get a blood infection, you get gangrene, you lose your arm or your leg, and maybe you die. So again, that was that presence of death all the time, looking over your shoulder, making sure that I'm going to try and get through this day because who knows what tomorrow will bring. Another thing that happens as we move out of the 1800s, particularly as a result of the Civil War, we start embalming, and we start moving from dying at home to dying in facilities. Somebody else takes care of us. We die somewhere else other than home, particularly as we start coming into the 20th century. And the families aren't attendant as they would be previously when people were sick and die at home. The families stopped preparing the bodies. You stopped having wakes in the house. You give that job to the funeral director. The funeral director takes your loved one from wherever they have died, oftentimes a facility rather than home, and they have the task of basically giving you back your loved one as close to living and normal as possible. So we take our death experience, that takes our death experience away from us, and we put it in someone else's hands. So instead of being confronted by it on a regular basis, like our folks in the colonial period and in the 19th century were, now it becomes more of a cloistered, quiet, sad, it's always been sad, but something that we just don't face until we absolutely have to. Modern medicine allows us to cheat death on a regular basis. You need a kidney? I used to say, I can give you one. If you hang on just a little longer, we'll just print you a new one, right? We have mapped our human genome. We're doing genetic engineering. We are making strides so quickly. And medicine has moved at such a rapid pace, just even in the last 100 years. And just absolutely my personal opinion, I think one of the reasons that we got so freaked out about the pandemic is because we couldn't go get a pill or a shot for it. At first, we're confronted with our mortality and no way to deal with this virus that was coming for us. But look how fast we got some medicine for it. So we had to confront our mortality, but now, okay, we know how to deal with it. We got medicine, we're gonna move on. So these spaces, these modern cemeteries, all of that and more, of course, gives us less opportunity, if you will, quotated. We stop going here the way the folks in the 19th century did, you know, with their picnics and their parties and their books. And so that changes this landscape. Modern groundskeeping changes this landscape. There's also a backlash after Queen Victoria dies in 1901. Within a decade or so, there's an arts and crafts movement that makes its way over here, and we want to simplify. So in the land of the living, we simplify our architecture and our furniture and our own presentation. Women have cut their hair and hemlines are coming up. We're getting rid of the bustles. The men are shaving off those giant mutton chops on their faces. We want to simplify. So we've simplified the land of the living. We're going to simplify the land of the dead as well. And also the material changes. That's granite. Granite is one of the hardest surfaces, hardest rocks that we have. It comes from the molten core of the earth. It's igneous rock. So until we developed the tools to work with this, pneumatic tools, water-powered tools, air-powered tools, to work with this on a large scale, to be able to get this hard rock out of the ground and work it, again, like the marble, we now have the tools and the methods to get it and move it. Now it becomes a modern day material, very, very easily accessible for regular objects such as tombstones. Because of all those changes and because we leave this scene for quite a while, when you would walk into a 20th century cemetery and you look at the stones, they could be these large granite stones, and maybe they've got a name, you know, a family name on the front, the surname, and then the information on the back, and maybe somebody's birth year and their name and their death year, but not a lot of information in between. And what I've noticed, I would put it right back into about the 80s. We decided that we wanted to reclaim that. We wanted to talk about who we were and the things that we enjoyed. And we start putting these things on our tombstones. And they will tell me a lot. I can walk into your cemeteries in this town that I'm only an hour and a half, not an hour and 15 minutes away from, and I can meet people by passing through that cemetery gate that I existed in the same time and contemporaneously with, but never had a chance to meet. But now, either they themselves or their loved ones, by erecting their tombstones, have given me some personal information about who they were. I can see pictures. I can see their faces. These two images up at the top, those are called photoceramics because they are small pieces of ceramic fired porcelains that through an emulsion process, a photo is put on the ceramic and then it's sealed and then it's attached to the stone. So I can see people on a good day long ago, maybe a wedding day. I can see who they were, what they did. One of the things that I was finding when I was choosing these, I might have something, I might have profession. Here, I might have hobbies, but I have individuals, I have information. I race dogs, I breed dogs, you know, maybe I like to go to the track and bet on the dogs. Maybe I liked trains, maybe I was an engineer. Maybe I loved to play music, clearly, and any of you guitar aficionados out there, I know you can tell exactly what make and model that is. You know, so maybe I played that guitar for hobby. Maybe I played in a band. Maybe I traveled in a band. Whatever I did, I made music. Maybe I'm an astronomer. Maybe I just love to look at the stars at night, and certainly out here with a lot less light pollution, you got a lot better view of the night sky than I do, just, again, an hour and 15 minutes away. This is a photoceramic. This, too, is a photoceramic. So I love my car and my dog. Maybe I raced my car. Maybe that's what the number is on that. I see people's pets on their stones all the time. Our pets are as much a member of our family as your husband or your kid. I can see where you lived and that you enjoyed being outside. I see a lot of outdoors imagery. I see fishing. I see a lot of very envious deer. My husband is a hunter and a forest to table kind of cook. I see a lot of animals that he'd be very envious of. But it shows me who you are and what you did, what you thought about while you were here. What did you do with yourselves, both professionally and in your leisure time? Cemeteries are much more than just going in and taking walks. They are much more than just going in with a costumed guide or a gravestone girl guide and finding out what's out there. And because we are in New England, we are just as puritanical as we were when we got here 400 years ago. But I promise you that when you get outside of New England, a lot of this stuff is going on. And this is but a few things I've seen people do with their cemetery space to engage the keeping bees. So good for the environment, good for your plant, fauna. And I can promise you that any honey that comes out of those cemetery hives is spoken for before it ever leaves the hive. It brings money to the cemetery. Gardening club, let's harness the power of the community that likes to garden and let them come in and brighten up our landscapes and plant flowers, not just being in there mowing the grass as we have an obligation to do, but let's improve our landscapes. This makes everyone scream. Dog park. Now, I'm probably not going to make any difference in a more rural community because you got a lot of open space. This dog park that I'm talking about happens to be in Congressional Cemetery in Washington, D.C. been around for at least 20 years. You have a membership for each one of your dogs at a pretty good price, pretty hefty annual membership fee. And you are allowed to bring your dogs in and run them off leash. There are water bowls for them all over the place. Everybody knows who everybody is, and they know if you're not cleaning up after your dog. And if you're not cleaning up after your dog, don't worry, they will let you know and they will toss you out. You will lose your membership money, you'll lose your membership, and they're not worried about it because there is a waiting list of 2 to 3 years for people that want to be part of the dog park in the cemetery. You tell me where else you are going to run your dog in open green space in Washington, D.C. Weddings and parties. Who doesn't want to go to a party in the cemetery, right? A real legal party. Dinner and a movie. Hollywood Forever Cemetery in Los Angeles, where it's only this small 40 acres. They got the glitterati of the golden age of Hollywood buried there. They show movies. It brings people in. They pay for it. And Night of the Living Dead was filmed there as well. Yoga. Can you think of a more peaceful place to do yoga than the cemetery? 5K runs. Go out at night. Look at the stars. Book clubs and death cafes. Let's get together as a community, whether we know each other or not. Let's read something that we can talk about. Let's talk about, in these death cafes, let's talk about our mortal experience. Let's come back together as a community and recognize our mortality. That's me in my happy place. So this is me hawking my wares at a place called the Market of the Macabre in Laurel Hill Cemetery in Philadelphia. It happens once a year. There's 70 offbeat vendors, such as the Gravestone girls. They set us up in one part of the cemetery, which is Laurel Hill is a beautiful 19th century garden cemetery. They set us up, as you can see, right amongst the tombstones. It's one day a year. It's coming up, September 9th. Everybody, you can come with me. 12 to 5. 12 noon to 5 o'clock. In 5 hours, they get 2,500 to 3,000 people through the gate at $5 a head. Do the math. That money goes right to the cemetery. The vendors pay to be there. They have food trucks. They often have cocktail trucks, so my customers are bringing me dark and stormies, which is a lot of fun for everybody. They get membership. They have a gift shop. They're selling things. All that money goes to the cemetery. With all of these activities and more, that money goes right back to the cemetery and allows them to mow the lawn, because the lawn ain't going to mow itself. It allows them to do education, it allows them to do restoration, and it puts living boots on the ground in these spaces. The more living people there are in these spaces, the safer they are, if you're in there with good intentions. The vandalism, the damage, the destruction happens in these spaces when people aren't present. When people that want to do those bad things think that there's nothing going on and nobody's looking, that's when your cemeteries and your spaces become endangered. Y'all know what this is? So prior to the pandemic, I had to explain what that was. Now y'all know that that's a QR code. So it brings us to our last thing here, technology, mobile apps and QR codes. Cemeteries are creating their own apps, so you don't have to show up at 6 o'clock on a Thursday night to listen to the tour of the cemetery, but I'm all glad you did. You can go in at your leisure, and you can use the app to make your way through the cemetery as little or as long as you like to. And like I said with the QR codes, we had no idea in this country what a QR code was before the pandemic, but now everybody knows. So, and this object here, this little tiny one right there, has been around well before the pandemic. So here it's been enlarged for your viewing pleasure. It is called a memory medallion. It's made by the Memory Medallion Company in Pennsylvania that holds, you'll see up at the top, they hold the US patent for using QR technology for cemeteries and memorialization. So you can purchase this little QR code. It's about an inch in diameter. You put it on your stone, and the next thing you know, somebody comes along with their smartphone. Because who leaves the world without this? I know I couldn't have gotten here without it tonight. So they take their smartphone, they scan your QR code, and it brings them to your website. 999 spaces to do anything you want. Put your pictures, put your poetry, put your writings, put pictures of your pets. Genealogists, put your genealogy research out there. Put your awards, put your achievements, put your thoughts, put your paintings, anything you want. It's completely yours to do with whatever you like. So when you scan that QR code, it takes you here to Mrs. Buchanan. She is their spokesmodel. And among other things, shades of blue are her favorite colors and daisies are her favorite flowers. And there's a whole lot more than just that kind of information on her website, on her Memory Medallion website. In her life, she was known for the famous family caramel recipe. There is a 14-minute video on her Memory Medallion website of her in the kitchen, bossing her adult son around to teach us all how to make the famous family caramel recipe. And I think, have you guys, I've seen a lot of this lately. Have you guys seen on the internet, Facebook, whatever, people are putting recipes on their tombstones? And there was a woman that just made a book, right, of how many ever recipes, right? Talk about a lasting legacy. And it's very, very personal. You thought I was done, right? We got another 3-4 hours. We're all set. No. There's just a few more that I wanted to make sure that you knew were here. Because like all the rest of the stuff you've seen tonight, these were some fun things or interesting things I found around town. Watch for maker's marks. So this is in St. Mary's. This beautiful wrought iron marker on the back side of it has what I believe is a maker's mark. And if I'm correct, it's either Austrian or German. The maker, and perhaps an immigrant they're from. I haven't done any research, I don't know, but it's always a good place to start. Mr. Elijah Willard departed this life September 10th, 1779, in the 27th year of his age, right? You can't just go, oops, rub that out. Nope, we just cross that right out. And whenever I see stuff like that, I go, did you get a discount for that? Right? So that being said, another quick footnote. You may see things on stones that maybe aren't spelled the way we spell them nowadays, or like the use of the word ye. We use thee now. They used to use ye. If you see something that doesn't look right from a spelling point of view, it may be a typo, but it also might not be. Words mean different things over time, and their spellings evolve. So don't always write it off as a mistake, but no doubt, whoops, that was a boo-boo. And then I had mentioned previously that your gravestones might predate or post-date, and sometimes very late post-date. Here I found Mr. Elijah Holton, 1749, 1832, and then this note, erected in 1899 by his grandsons to replace the original stone, then illegible. Would have been very interesting to know In 1832, it was probably marble, may have been sandstone as well. And a little bit of irony there because that's marble, and it's pretty good. It's still really good because the carving is very deep, but it's going to deteriorate over time as well. Got to have all the parts for Resurrection Day, right? Mr. Samuel Dyke, born October 27th, 1790, broke his leg August 11th, 1849, had it amputated August 21st, and died February 28th, 1855, aged 64. You gotta wonder if the amputated leg is there with him. At least that's where my mind goes. Now, granted, he got a good 6 years after the amputation, or after yeah. No, maybe not. Yeah, broke in 1849, had it amputated, August, so 10 days later, and then he died 6 years later. Probably not from his leg. However, I have seen cases, so you got to do something with that body part, right? So we're going to bury it. Nowadays, you lose your leg, they don't give it back. But it's entirely possible that that leg was buried, and then when he died, he was buried with the leg. I have seen that in the several, just one or two gravestones, an amputated arm that says right on the stone, buried with his amputated arm. You got to have all the pieces on Resurrection Day. World with one leg, we've got to make sure we keep them all together. I've told you to look up, look down, interpret this, look at the type of stone. What does the writing say? What do the pictures say? Hey, is that in Latin? Don't forget to look at the whole thing. This is a very modern slate stone. Pentecost was just opened in 1985. You walk around the back side of the stone, and way down at the bottom is that little strawberry. It meant something to them and would have been important to be put there. So there's always wonderful treasures to be found. My job this evening, I hope I have given you a ton. I know I've given you a ton of information, and I can think of a whole bunch of things that I forgot to say, but that's okay, because, you know, we'll do this again sometime. But really, the thrust of this evening has been to tell you what wonderful spaces these are. Meet people, learn stuff, time travel. They are free art galleries. They are free open museums. We still got daylight. You could get out there and explore, because really, you never do know what you're going to see. My thanks to Misha and the library. My thanks to the Historical Society for helping bring me in tonight for this program. Thank you all so much for coming out. Make sure you grab your propaganda on the table back there. Like I said, I want my social media numbers up tomorrow. Yeah, not next week. I'm not waiting until next week. Tomorrow. Happy 350th birthday.